We're here to put your accounts in cruise control. Hello, everyone. Bront, CatHerder here. We're having some fun talking Raid Shadow Legends, and I am not alone. I brought the man, the myth, the legend, KruYsen on the channel. KruYsen, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, brother. Thank you for having me here. It's going to be a pleasure to talk about Raid. We love doing it.
Oh, yeah, and you're all about the arena, which is, of course, what we're bringing on here. Just in case folks don't know you, why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself?
I've been doing Raid content for about a year now, but I've been playing the game for the past 6 years. So I growed into the game as the game it was growing itself. So I experienced every little change we had for the past 6 years of Raid, and I reached the end game a long time ago, and I fell in love with the arena because it is the area that I think is most versatile. It's the area that I think we farm and we grind these dungeons and towers and everything else to build our champions in the best to that area. So that's the area that I felt in love the most with the game, and where I dedicate myself the most.
Yeah,
For sure.
He's a runner of the Doc Moreau account for the Live Arena stuff here. So as you can see, that is the number 3 account in Raid in the Live Arena total. Where did you come into the seasons? Number 6 in the seasons. And the seasons are, of course, how many of these raids did you win, not necessarily how good you are in some cases, although, again, you're running an 83% win rate, so you're obviously pretty good with that. But, yeah, he loves the arena, and that's why I wanted to have him on here. Arena really is the area where you can build a team that is good enough to finish anything in PvE, and then for the most part you're done with it, outside of a few of the competitive PvE things for like Hydra and Chimera. But in the arena, it's a constant shift. There's constant meta changes. There's a constant reason to rebuild your champions to make them bigger, stronger, faster. Raid continues to give us the technology, as it were, if we want to go that way, and it's fun. And it's oftentimes a rough spot for early players, and it's a rough spot, honestly, for late players. And I think some of it is, I know it's, even content creators, we're probably guilty on focusing, this champion's amazing, this champion's amazing. And sometimes we fail to really communicate that any one champion is only as good as the rest of the team around them. And building a team is probably just as critical, possibly if not more critical, than just having a single meta champion on your team.
Exactly. The arena is really interesting because on the PvE, if you know what a champion is capable of doing, on the PvE he's going to almost every time behave the same way. It's not the same at the PvP, because on the PvP you're gonna have the team around him and the sets, the way the champion is built. It can be fast, it can be slow, it can be built for damage, it can be built for CC debuff, whatever it is on his kit. So you have many ways of building a champion, and every team now makes a difference. The relic the champion have, the set the champion have, the blessing the champion have, the mastery the champion have. Every point of that makes the champion, what the capabilities of what's possible to do with that champion change. And that's the magical of the PvP. You can build a champion in as many possible ways as it exists. And it's going to be fun to play around it.
Yeah, and it's one of these things too, where sometimes from an early game standpoint, it's actually kind of fun to be able to build a team that works really well and synergizes very well. As we were talking earlier, and in fact, I just ran an arena team here. Fabian has been absolutely amazing on my free-to-play account from the Hell Hades perspective. Fabian just does so much, but that doesn't mean you can't build a team around him that does other good stuff. I happen to have Morgaine, for example. Morgaine brings you Fears on this A2, as well as some buff stealing as well. And the fact they can have a second person put Fears out plays back into Fabian's kit, making him that much stronger. And it's team synergy like that that can be absolutely amazing. So I guess what kind of tips do you give for newer players with accounts? I mean, not necessarily this one specifically, but accounts like mine that are early in the game that have very limited champions.
So for the start of the game, I would say never play with speed, because in the end game you're gonna play a lot with speed. The measurement of speed is really important. For the early game, never play with speed. Assume always you are slower, so never go for all-in speed battle, because if you're not, faster than your opponent, you might get something tricky happen to you. So I always assume my opponent's faster than me when I'm playing early game accounts, and I try to play around that. If I am not faster, this team can do the job, or it won't do the job. And I'm always like that. So if you have the possibility of having stone skin on everybody, it's really good. Assuming you're not faster, even if you're faster, it's going to work the same way. If you're not faster, you're a little bit safer than most of the naturally normal player. If you don't have a crazy strong team, focus on your strongest champion. That's good sometimes. If you don't trust to have many champions build, and most of the early game players won't have, always trust your strongest champion. If you have your best build in Alice, for example, that you show on the screen,
Hmm.
use Alice the most you can, because usually you're going to put your best gear on one single champion, and that's going to be the top of the quality that you have on your account at that moment, and you should trust it because it's going to be your best performance.
Yeah, and that's like part of the reason that Alice is one of the best champions, and I think this is something that early accounts can't underplay. She came with a 5-star soul, and that 5-star soul is so many. I mean, that's almost 10k extra HP. That's another 10%, in this case 15% extra attack on the total attack, not even just the base there. That's a lot of extra attack. The extra defense, even arena where ignore defense is king, defense is still helpful to have. That extra crit rate means that she smacks better than anybody else on my account before I put her in good gear. So whoever you get a soul for, they're probably going to play a role in your teams early. Don't ignore the Iron Twins even early. That's one of the reasons I did so well, is I was farming Iron Twins daily even when I was only hitting like level 6. It just makes a huge difference. Lutex actually is probably a very viable arena thing for early counters as well, because he can give you the speed boost and the speed aura, which can help you even if you can't win all the speed races. But the fact that a soul was reasonably attainable, even a 3-star soul, that's so huge on him as well.
Yeah, the extra stats from the souls are really important, even more on legendary and higher champions. Mythicals, but it's going to be hard to have Mythicals in the beginning of the game. But if you have a soul for a champion, you need to consider the extra stats that the soul brings. Not only the effect of the soul that you're going to pick, but also the extra stats. That's really important.
Yeah, especially if you're struggling for stats here. I mean, even for an epic here, this is a lot of extra chunks of stats that you're just not going to get anywhere else. So,
Even more
um,
now that we have PvE very hard modes like factional was hard mode. So the access stats that a soul might put freely to your champion, it's really good. Sometimes you're gonna change a little bit the team that you're using because of a soul you have on a different champion. Even epic champions that might make the difference, the extra resistance, the extra accuracy, the extra survivability through HP and defense. That's make really good difference.
yeah, and as far as speed is concerned, because you mentioned speed, and I think that's a great point here. Just this game, this account is definitely somewhat progressed. I'm 140-ish days in, but my arbiter 335 speed, not going to win end game fights, but certainly going to win enough that I can at least count on, if the other team doesn't have as strong of a speed lead, I've got a shot at it. And that's the other thing. It's not just the speed of the champion, because 335, pretty decent from where I'm at, but it's that 30% speed aura plus the intimidating presence that is also the other key to that as well. Whereas if I only had like Ludex with the 25 speed aura, I'm probably not ever going to go after another RB team, at least an RB led team, just because that aura might be the difference between me going first and me not going first. And I think that's what you're talking about by not going for speed early.
Yeah, if you don't see a speed boost on the other side and not a speed lead out or something like that, you can risk. You can assume that you're faster because the amount of time that's going to play to be a tricky team on the other side is going to be low. But as higher you climb the arena, that's going to gradually be false
Mhm.
because you're gonna have teams without speed leading, without speed out, and champions close to 500 speed. And even with your fastest champion, you're not going to be able to be faster than him.
Yeah,
So
and it's
in the low arena, if you don't see a speed aura, you can try to beat him on speed.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, like, I know early on I would occasionally get caught off guard because I mean, I got Morgaine pretty early, so and I had the Sun Wukong, so I had a decent speed lead and a speed champion, so I had a chance in some speed. And I can tell you, I can't tell you how many times I would go against somebody that I would have Seeker as their speed booster, and their Seeker would somehow be faster than I was expecting, and I would lose the speed race and I'd lose the fight. So you gotta, sometimes there's certain champions that you can identify and say, I'll bet that champion is super fast. And sometimes it's just experience that the only way you're going to find that.
And
Otherwise, you're looking for ways to make your team work together. I know debuffs are certainly not the end game team, but early on, debuffs, I mean, Ugo is actually a very good early to mid game arena champion because block buffs is actually super powerful. Decreased defense is also needed, particularly if you don't have that savage early on some champions.
yeah, for sure. And even if you have the Savage, it's really hard to have a good one, since Fahrenheit is probably one of the most difficult places to farm in the beginning of the game. The Fahrenheit is a little bit challenging for most of the players. The Spider and the Fahrenheit, I think, are the two most difficult ones in the beginning of the game. The Spider might be easy, depending on the champions that you have, but if you don't have, it's going to be a little bit tricky. If you don't have shields or if you don't have max HP champions or HP burns. In the beginning, it won't matter that much HP burn, but as you go to hard mode, it is. So if you don't have a cold heart in the beginning of the game, it's going to be hard to
Oh
beat
yeah.
also Fire Knight and Spider.
Yeah, I mean, and I've gotten lucky with some of this thing. I actually had, this is the only champion I've got in lethal, but and sometimes that's the thing too. Damage dealers, sometimes you make do with damage dealers. I built Durandil because I had Alice, I had Sun Wukong, and then I had Kale as a nuker. So Durandil was a capable epic nuker. He's not absolutely meta, but this A3 here hits really, really hard because it ignores a bunch of defense. He does decent damage with the AoE that gets some extra turn meter and ignores extra defense as well. And sometimes it is a matter of identifying who is good enough to be viable because, you can't forget tag. There's some decent rewards in tag, particularly early. Unlocking, Direct Star is certainly going to help your account overall. So not ignoring tag, even if you don't focus on it, you don't want to be ignoring tag. But I mean, just generally for an early game team, what are you trying to put together for? I mean, what are the kind of the four key roles you're kind of looking for of a 4-man team in an early team?
There are two roles that you cannot not have. First one is the speed booster because speed is going to be important. Even if you're losing the speed battle in the first place, you might be able to cut them depending on the strategy you have around your team. And the second role is the nuka. It's very hard to win a battle in the beginning of the game without a nuka. That's going to happen in the end game, but not that much in the early game. So to have a speed booster and a nuka is something that I think is mandatory. And the two other spots, I would suggest to use support champions. Sometimes offensive champions that can debuff the enemy team, or another speed booster to aid with your speed, and maybe a buff removal or something like that. It's going to be good. Someone, for example, if you are able to get Madame Cerise at the beginning of the game, she's amazing for that. You're gonna have buff strip, you're gonna have decreased defense, you're gonna have decreased attack. If you do not remove with the A3, you can try to remove with the A2 and put the fears. I think she's super versatile and she's void affinity, and she doesn't need to hit for the A3, which is really good. Even she needed to, she's a void, but it's something really interesting. I think she's a very powerful champion for the beginning of the game. For sure, is a void champion, not going to be easy, but extremely powerful. And we have another versions of champions that can do that. To remove, to strip the enemy team is really good. You can play with that to make your nuka have a safe passage to
Mhm.
deal his damage,
Yep.
and that's really important.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, I built Arbiter pretty quickly because I got to her pretty quickly. But early on, I used Tagore as a speed booster. He has increased speed. He doesn't have a speed boost, but increased speed is still increasing the team's speed. And it's a heal, which actually in early game where you're not necessarily one-shotting the other team, very viable as well. Revives, I think, are actually very underrated in Arena. They're staple now of endgame Arena again, but on the early game, sometimes something like that, or like a Rector Drath, for example, can redirect who can get attacked where with her veil sometimes, brings a powerful amount of heals. And early on, Rector is actually great because she's a bad affinity for most early teams because a lot of early teams are very magic heavy as well.
Yeah.
Champions like that can be very viable. Morag can be an interesting one because not only do you have the AoE that can hit pretty hard with Strengthen, but Ally Attack is a very good way to get extra damage on the team as well. It's stuff like this that you should worry about making use of early. Even Broadmaw is actually a very viable speed booster for the early game. Increased speed and turn meter fill. Yes, it's a low case of speed, but he's cheap to fuse, and you can fuse him infinitely. If you're desperate for a speed booster, you could do worse than a Broadmaw early game at least.
Yeah. And Arbiter is not a champion that you're gonna take so long to obtain right now, and she can feel multiple roles at the same time. Because being the speed boost, the speed aura, being the speed booster, being the reviver for extra speed booster, and she even have a buff removal on day two and a weaken on day one. It's really strong. She's like one of the champions that you're going to grind in the beginning of the game and until the end of the game. You're gonna use her. It doesn't matter. She's going to be one of your most viable and important champions almost in every time of the game that you are. It doesn't matter if you're early game, mid game, end game, ultra end game, whatever you want to call it. She's a viable champion. She's a viable speed booster. She's a queen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know it's one of the things I've talked with Drock about this as well, and he's mentioned this too, that Siphi for a while had kind of supplanted Arbiter as the queen of speed in many cases because of that 5 extra base speed. But we've
Yeah.
gone full circle because the raw speed numbers are so high that that's not as big a deal as having the 30% speed aura combined with the 30% extra turn meter fill immediately on her. That's become more important in the end game again. And it's really kind of hard to understate how good Arbiter is, that the fact that there are people that still love using Arbiter, probably even where you're at in Arena regularly. So,
Yeah, Siphi has something really interesting. Is the amount of buffs and the kind of buffs she puts.
mhm.
She has one of the highest, if not the highest, base speed in the game. But the amount of turn meter she feels is not the most useful one right now. The speeds number are so high in the end game that to have someone with 500 speed is possible and attainable now. But to have the second champion at 10% less speed than that is almost impossible. If you have a very fast one, you don't have a secondary one with just 450 speed. You're not going to have your Nuka with 450 speed. There are people that can have, but not many. But so 10%, 15% turn meter boost in the end game is not something that viable. You need at least 25% to make the things go, and you are in danger of being cutted by, because right now there are so many mechanics to cut champions, like instant turns, supersonic sets, blessings like temporal chains, and passives that are
Mhm.
many. So, as I said, you think you're going to win the speed battle, but you're not going to win the speed battle at all. You lose the speed battle and you still place first in the enemy. That's really funny sometimes.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing I do want to mention from an early game standpoint is control, I think, is something that, even in the end game, you see a lot of control. Stun is, their turn meter manipulation, certainly very helpful. That's one of the reasons that Morgane's great, is she's got the turn meter drop in addition to her turn meter. This is a 50% turn meter swing, effectively. Very good when you can land that. End game is less viable because it doesn't go through stone skin, but still very good overall. But like, I've used KruYsen the Blue because of that AoE freeze, very, very viable early game, because if the enemy doesn't get a turn, even if you're not faster than everybody, this lets you be faster than everybody for the first turn at least. And then you can take a turn and go from there.
And he also have
Taragi's,
a speed booster.
yeah, Taragi's, provoke can be very, very helpful as well. Geomancer, actually, Geomancer was one of my top 5 people in Live Arena when I was fighting early on in Live Arena, partially because I was constantly fighting bots and they would ban the first person on my team with an aura. So I'd pull him first, figuring, okay, I lose Geomancer and I wouldn't care. But when I wouldn't lose him because somebody would say, oh, I'm going to ban your Monkey King instead of something else because that made sense. Well, 100% turn meter steal and then the reflect damage with that burn basically meant I could take somebody on the other team out entirely, and before they could actually do anything with them, they were dead. Very,
Yeah,
very
that's interesting. Turn
sneaky,
mid steel.
viable. Stuff like that. Be creative. Find useful, interesting ways to use your team. And that's why I say team building is something that is very, very important. And it's, it's kind of hard to highlight when you're talking about individual champions, but having two different champions that actually play off of each other very well, and then you can have a third one to it. And if you can build a team of four people that interconnect properly, it is so much more powerful than having four meta champions that you just pick blindly.
Yeah, and there's something really important at the beginning of the game. Speed plays a role really important in every area of the game and every stance of the game that you are. It doesn't matter to the beginning to the end game. Speed's really important. So in the beginning of the game, do not focus just on speed set because there are many sets that give you speed right now. Probably it's easier to make a faster champion with broken pieces sometimes, or even through perception. Perception, I think, is the most farmable set that you're going to have in the beginning of the game. Pharaoh also, if you're in a clan that's doing the siege. So do not just focus on speed set in the beginning of the game because it's not going to be always the fastest set that you have on your account. You might be faster with broken sets or other kind of sets that in general gives more, not the best speed, but gives you more speed because you have better rolls on them.
Yeah. And I think we're definitely worth highlighting because we got the event dumb and dungeon again coming soon. Pinpoint is absolutely worth going for. In fact, I would recommend once the dungeon is open, any energy you might have thought of going towards spider, if it's not for a spider event for a fusion, should go instead into that pinpoint dungeon because pinpoint accessories are so much better than the spider accessories, even bad pinpoint accessories. Looking here, my Alice has got 3 pinpoint accessories. So this is an extra, 40 accuracy and 10% extra speed on Alice.
Yeah.
That's a game changer. I don't have pinpoint on this champion because I built them, but I've got pinpoint on my Tyrant, while I've also got, perception and relentless on him to get him all the accuracy and everything else. This pinpoint here let me hit speeds I would never have expected to on early game accounts. It is so powerful, and I've still got 4-star pinpoint gear on some champions because that extra 20 accuracy and extra 10% speed is worth giving up almost 2 stars worth of stats on some of these things in many cases.
Yeah, sometimes one row or 2 rows or 3 rows on accuracy that you're going to have on a normal spider standard accessories. It's fulfilled just by the effects of the pinpoint, and you still get the extra speed for 2 pieces, which is really amazing. That's why pinpoint is so important, even if you don't have a 4 pieces for the intercept or something like that. The 2 pieces is already enough, or even 1 piece, just for the extra accuracy. Sometimes it's helpful. You have a banner, a good banner or a good ring that you want extra accuracy, and you go there. It just aids you to have better stats.
Yep. So that also gave me a chance to transition over to my main account here, so we can talk a little more about the end game. Obviously, this is this account is certainly a little more stacked as far as building some of these teams. And from an end game, teams are still very, very important. I know I mentioned it in the intro, but knowing when to bring a White Queen versus a Siphi versus an Ostrid versus an Arbiter, Ostrid, for example, I know she's not exactly the top tier speed booster, but she's got a good set of speed boost and other stuff. I started using her more because I got the 6-star blessing with intimidating presence. And that just by itself made her possibly more valuable than Arbiter in some cases for me, just because that extra speed swing, because we're talking, 35% extra aura speed on my team and 20% less on the enemy team. That's actually a pretty decent swing.
Yeah, and the extra speed the star gives also. 15 speed's not something to not talk about. And it's kind of interesting because Elstrid and Zivi has really high base speed, so they are good for that. Arbiter has lower base speed, but Arbiter has the speed aura, what Elstrid and Zivi doesn't have. Arbiter has a 30% turn mid boost. Elstrid has a really good turn mid boost, better than Zivi's, and she also has the extra turn to give you the enemy the lower turn meter. So she acts on the both sides, boosting your team and decreasing the enemy team. Sometimes works, sometimes not because of Stone Skin and other things. So there are 3 different strategies around them. Each one has the strong point and a weak point. There's no perfection. For example, Street does not have the best speed out of them. Sifi has the lowest turn meter, boost, not having the speed auto, but she has the base speed, and she brings a lot of protective buffs to your team, which the other two doesn't. The other two are more offensive. Sif is more defensive, even on the buffs
Mhm.
itself. So it's the line of choice between them depends on the team, not only the team you're building, but also the team you're facing. It's really important to mention that it's not only about you, what you have. It's about what you're facing, what your opponent have,
Yeah, that's
and
why I
how
mentioned
might they
Ancora along
be.
with them too, because Ancora does have turn meter boost, but 10% turn meter boost and only a 19% aura. No one considers
Yeah,
her a speed champion. But what makes her great, in addition, just a good kid overall, but she's got the passive that is constantly grabbing control debuffs off of your nuker and keeping your nuker clean. So I know, for example, I just recently redid my nice in feral and lethal to get that protection up. But, with an Ancora, I could possibly forego the feral and do something else instead if I'm going to pair nice with Ancora. It's probably not the best thing necessarily because this still gives you protection from bombs, protection from other
yeah.
debuffs as well.
The
But
reason to play him in Pharaoh is just bomb.
yeah.
If you take away bombs, you don't need to play him Pharaoh.
Mhm.
There's a lot of more interesting sets. But since bomb is so important to avoid, and now there's a second thing, that is the poisons.
Mhm.
Pharaoh is for that action that happens before your action, and it really fits nice. It really fits not only nice. The champions with inbuilt survivability passive kits like Siegfried, Rotos,
Mhm.
champions like that, you can try to play with Pharaoh because it's not going to compromise your survivability, not having stone skin on them because of their natural passives, which is not the true for many other champions. For example, if you have a He-Man and someone gives him a huge nuke, he's going to die and that's over.
Mhm.
But for Knights, for Rotos, for Siegfried, for Leorius, for Chassa's Cat, and many other champions, that's not true. They can survive because of their passives. So you can play a little bit around that set, and that's where the Pharaoh set comes in.
Yeah, and I mean,
Extra.
you could certainly play around too. That's where, taking a champion like a Freya, for example, Freya can basically give that to a nuker on your team, but you got to be careful because it can't be a double hit. Because if it's a double hit, this is not gonna save them. But for the single hit, you effectively are giving your nuker another stay alive passive with Freya, which is one of the reasons she
Yeah,
can be very good. But again, this goes back into team competition, and team competition or composition is going to be based off of who you're facing as much as anything else. We go back to Ancora. If I'm going to be facing a lot of people think that Siphi is the only answer for a Tormund, for example, if you don't have a lot of stone skin. But Ancora does effectively the same thing for your nuker that Siphi does with Freeze. In fact, possibly better because she 100% of the time routes it to herself and routes all the other CCs he might have as well, in addition to just Freeze.
yeah, that's really impactful. Really impactful. And Korra is a really strong. I wouldn't say speed booster because it's not the role that most of us play her,
Mm-hmm.
but support,
Yeah.
as her role says in the game. She's a really good support. Even better if you have Narcissus around because it's always dangerous. It's always dangerous. It to kill a Narcissus when there is an Ancora by his side is really dangerous because she can bring him back with all the skills backs and the turn meter. And to have a Narcissus have a turn is always dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
The champion is a rack machine.
Yeah, although amusingly enough, the counter for the Narcissus and Ancora is Marius. I found because I can't tell you how many times I've forgotten that Marius is on the other team. Revived Narcissus with Ancora, she'll drop his turn meter with her revive, and then he'll just
Yeah.
say, "Okay, fine, you're enfeebled," and it's like, oh, dang it.
To be
So,
fair, Marius is the counter to almost
oh
everything.
yeah, Marius is just he's Um, Marius might be the exception to the build a team. Marius can be the team in many cases for a lot of stuff. He counters a lot of stuff, but even then, you still need supports around Marius to make him go, keep him alive. You need to make sure he's built the right way. It really isn't like, there are champions, there are people in the end game like Biohack is probably well known for his Kaja. That's just absolutely insane, for example. It's probably one of the better ones I know of. And I'm sure there's other folks that are in the end game, but Biohack's one of the ones I know that has a unusual champion that he uses really effectively. And
Yeah.
it's still not just about Kaja. It's still a team that he builds around Kaja to surprise you. But because he uses Kaja well, he can build different teams than some other people do. And sometimes that can take you by surprise if you're not prepared for how another team is built, how they're constructed. And just as much as we're talking about team building on your team, you really do have to be aware of what the other team is doing. And that's where like the bans in Live Arena can be very, very crucial as well. Because sometimes, for example, somebody's building a team around Teox. And, sometimes it's easy to ban Teox, but sometimes you can not ban Teox and ban somebody else. You ban the Calvalax instead, and suddenly Teox is nowhere near as effective as he might have been otherwise because he's not going to get those instant poisons powered up. Or, something like a Sulfurion can sometimes be an easy break for a team that's going to rely on burns that can help neuter a Gizmek, for example, or something along those lines. It really is not just about a single champion. And that's why arena bans can be very difficult as well, because if you build a team correctly, you should have a unity of 5 champions where you either have 2 different champions that do enough of the same thing that they can't just ban one and prevent it from happening, but there's also one champion you can't ban that will break the entire setup of your team, hopefully.
Yeah, the complexity around the arena teams is that you can have champions, and the more complex and the better the champion, it's how more complexity he brings to the your team and to the enemy team
Mhm.
to deal with. For example, when Marius is on the play, you have a self-buffing champion, so he doesn't need anyone to buff his damage. He buffs his own damage by his A3. He gets the Exaton, he puts increased defense for your whole team, increased accuracy for your whole team. He has a mood hit skill that remove debuffs. So he has also the role of a buff stripper. At the same time, he has a passive that's really annoying to deal. You cannot remove 10 meter from him, and if you attempt to do, he's going to counterattack with you. And his A1 has a lot of damage. So the amount of complexity a one champion brings is very high. That is really good to use mythicals as examples,
Mhm.
because the amount of things that mythicals bring is not one form, it's 2 forms. So you have to have in mind that you have at least 6 SKUs or more, sometimes 8, sometimes 9 SKUs, to be aware of what they can do, because that might be very impactful in the game. If you planning to do a very fast team and wipe out your enemy team entirely in a single blow, and you have an eyes on the other side or Siegfried, you can still blow the whole team. But when the champion passives procs, your the team that you just blown away is going to be revived with block damage and things like that, or you're going to transform an eyes and he's going to be able to nuke you and revive everybody back, and you're going to be CC'd and or dead or something like that. So you need to take in consideration that many factors that passives and the champions kits brings. That's the magic of arena, and not only that, the how they're built. For example, you're showing Kriegs on the screen.
Yep.
You can have a very fast Kriegs accuracy base. You can have a very fast Kriegs resistance base, and the way you're going to deal with it's totally different. Because sometimes you want to CC her or debuff her to avoid her action, to try to remove her stone skin. But if she's resistance based, maybe she's able to resist. And she also immune to some things on the first form, so even more things to take in consideration.
Yeah, Crixie is one of the ones that's got multiple builds for her. Lazarius, I think, is another one where there's like 5 different ways you can build Lazarius. All of them can be dangerous, and sometimes you don't know which one you're going to be fighting at any point in time, because he can be a nuker, he can be a support, he can be a speed champion, he can be a reviver. He does
And it
an
can be
awful
all at the
lot.
same time.
Yeah. That's part of why, Galathier is so powerful, because again, he does a bunch of stuff. He does it all really well, and you can almost do everything at the same time, but you can still have specific builds that may tweak to be better at one versus the other. So it's always, you can't just count on Galathier's going to play this way, because you actually don't know if he's going to play that way.
Yeah, the amount of possibilities of building Galateer is like as many sets that you have in the game is the many, with the many ways you can build this champion. Even Nuka Galateer is a viable. He has a good mood player.
Well, that's the thing too. Sometimes surprise champions can be fun. I'm bringing Ultimate Death Knight up because this is one of the ones I've heard of before. But nuking Death Knight is totally a thing.
Yeah, I
I
use
think,
him that way.
Yeah, I think you were talking with, I think it was Ash, you were talking about nuking Armands, I think.
Yeah,
With somebody was doing that. And, it's just sneaky damage on Armands. And, sometimes that type of thing, heck, we go back to Ostrid. Ostrid actually does a decent amount of damage. And for a multiple use build, you can build her with full crit rate and she'll do enough damage that if you get caught without your nuker, she could possibly still win just on damage alone because she actually hits pretty hard.
yeah. There are multiple support champions with decent multipliers on their skills that you can sneak in some hybrid build to
Hmm.
keep they doing their roles as supports or whatever it is, and extra stats to give them a little bit of damage since they have the possibility of doing it. Totally different, for example, for Sifi, that only has one damage on his kit, is an A1,
Hmm.
and it's only a single hit. So for her to nuke a whole team is going to take at least 4 turns,
Yeah.
which is hard.
Hmm.
But for champions like that have AoEs like Alstrid or Armans, you can still nuke a whole team with your support. And there are magic champions like Lazarius that can do the same. With the same build that can do the damage and the speed boosting and whatever you want him to do. That's why he's so amazing.
Yeah, and that's really where, just like to pick on Androck for a minute. This is the reason Androck you don't see him a lot in Arena. Not that he's a bad champion or his kit's necessarily horrible. It's just a matter of his forms don't work well together. So you need to build him for one form or the other form for the most part. He just doesn't work well in either of those forms. And unfortunately, the PvP form is his second form, which basically means you have to wait to be able to transform him before he's going to become useful to your PvP team. And it's just, this doesn't mean that if you get him early, like if I got him on very free to play, oh yeah, I'd be bringing him in everywhere and I'd be using this skill here to strip and I'd be using this script here to enfeeble and I'd be going all over the arena on my low level account. But this is the reason you don't see him in high level arena. He just, that type of, and that's where when she picks, like you were saying, this mythical needs a buff. You're not saying that they're bad in any content. You're saying that they're not up to the level of mythicals where they're dangerous in every single form.
Yeah, in the early game and in the mid game, almost every team works. The performance you're going to face and the performance you're going to need is not the highest one. So every team works. People hate when I said you were saying Alice is amazing for early game, and I agree, she's amazing for early game. When you reach end game, she's terrible. She sucks.
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing she can do, it's horrible. For Nuka, she cannot totally nuke champions. She has like her capability of nuking is sometimes random. Her damage is not enough. Her ability to remove skills, it's very low for what you need. One turn is not enough in the end game. And if you're going to build her as a Nuka, to lose stats, putting some accuracy in other things, is going just to mitigate your capability as to be an entire powerful Nuka. So you won't be able to play her really well in the end game. She's not good at anything in the end game. But to the early game, she's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a champion that you have easy access to the soul. She can take skills. Everything that is bad for her in the end game is good for you in the early game
Mm-hmm.
because her performance in the end game doesn't have so many ways for you to counter. But in the end game, it's very easy to counter everything that she does. It's very easy to control her, to even to be locked by her. You're going to have your skills so fast that it's almost as you're not locked. And that's the difference between a champion in the end game and a champion in the early game. Is the same kit, is the same things, but the performance that you're going to see is different. Is like Androck. If you put him in the end game, it's totally a useless champion. Everything that he does is easy countered or is not in the best way or in a proper way. He will be polymorphed. He won't do damage. He won't. If he nukes you, if he has the possibility to nuke you, you're going to survive. His damage is not enough to kill in the end game. But in the early game, she can strip, he can debuffs, he can put in feeble, he can nukes, he can do everything. He's amazing. So it's different, the view you have for the champion, depending on the way, on the stage you are in the game.
Yeah, and I brought Thor up here because Thor is a good example actually of one that's useful for the early and the end game. But what probably happens if you're going to use him for an end game arena, he's still useful just because he can hit through block damage and unkillable, and that becomes an endgame viable skill. But you're probably then going to no longer build him with accuracy, which means, yes, he's not going to be able to land that decreased defense. But the fact that he still buffs himself means he's going to continue to do decent, good damage. Turn meter control is turn meter control is turn meter control, plus this can do extra damage on that too. He's not like an ultra endgame nuker that's going to be, top tier for you, but at least he's functional in the end game because he at least can do the role of a nuker for you well. And I guess that's always the difference between who works early and who works end game is how well
Yeah,
does their kit translate, and do you have to change the build for him as well?
yeah, he sure can do damage. He's a really good damage dealing, and he can do damage from the early game to the end game. He's still a good nuker, but you're not never going to see him being played in the highest level of arena because the way he can do damage is really simple. So even if you are able to ignore block damage with a skill, the champions that use block damage almost use it like passively, and they already ignore the damage while doing that. So, for example, if you face a Siegfried, that is, for example, the most useful champion for block damage, Thor won't do nothing against him because first you need to proc his second form, and
Mm-hmm.
if you proc his second form, he's going to nullify the damage. So the skill that avoid that go through the block damage won't kill him. Au contrary, you're going to give him the turn meter, and he's still gonna have the block
Mm-hmm.
damage there, and he's going to nuke you. He's going to use you as the focus of his
Mm-hmm.
A3, and he's going to blow your entire team. So the kit complexity of Thor is really limited to the end game, but to the PvE and to the early game, he's a massive damage dealer.
And it's weird too, because sometimes you get niche cases like Cowlite is actually somebody I found is actually good for countering Siegfried because this is a double hit that ignores block damage, and it actually hits pretty hard. So he'll kill him with the first one, he puts up the block damage, then he kills him a second time, boom. He's also really good for, I've actually done this before. I've actually killed a Narcissus and a Siegfried with Cowlite 1-2 with this skill because he'll basically go, he killed nice transform. He hit him with the second ability, killed him again. But again, this guy, unfortunately, this is the only thing that does the most damage. This doesn't do enough damage. And this turn meter stuff that he has just doesn't. I found this doesn't even work right against Armands. He was supposed to be an Armands counter. I've just found that for some reason he still gets stunned all the time, and he shouldn't get stunned. So I'm not quite sure what's going on with it. But
Usually, when I test him, he does not get stunned
hmm,
because he places the block buff before. The thing with Almonds is the order of the skill. First, Almonds remove the 10 meter. When he removes the 10 meter, he puts the block buff. So the stun comes after. That's why he blocks the
you
stun.
know what? I'm wonder if for some reason maybe it's been a turn because the other thing can do it. I see this has got a 5 turn cooldown. So if somebody triggers it ahead of time, maybe it doesn't
Yeah.
happen for some strange reason too. Who knows? Maybe I don't know. I found weirdness with him, but yeah, he's not perfect, but he's an interesting option, and that's what team composition comes in again. You might be able to sneak him in against the right team if the enemy team is doing something, with oh, I think I'm getting away with Siegfried and Nice in my team, and oh, I've got Ash Arrow, and you're not going to expect I'm going to counter him. You're still going to need to figure out how to get him to get a turn before you can do it. But that's,
Yeah.
again, it comes back
And
to team building. Harima, again, good for the team because she's got a great passive that helps the entire team. And she can do damage, so she can be a damage dealer. I guess the final thought here, I guess, for what are you kind of looking for when you're crafting a team for live arena? Because I mean, you've got 5 slots. Obviously, you're going to have people that are going to be stolen from you at some point. But like, what are you looking for? Are you looking for like, obviously 2 damage dealers are usually pretty critical because you need to have at least one of
us-
them survive.
yeah, you cannot have nothing but 2 damage dealers is like a mandatory unless you have a lot of champions that has incredible passives that we have right now.
Mm-hmm.
We have the champions with poison passives, HP burn passives, and things like that that they can do damage passively. Even if they're built as supports, they will do damage. Like Vulcanos, like Nell, like Kavlax, and they can do incredible amount of damage even with passive builds. and support builds. But usually you need two nukers and you need to observe the enemy team. Because even if you have in your mind your strategy build, if you not observe the enemy team, you're going to be countered. They can block your strategy. Okay, I'm going to put my fastest champion, my best nuker. They are well built. They have everything I have on my account on them. They're perfect. But if you don't pay attention on what your enemy is doing, you're going to be countered. Like, you put all your best champions there, then your enemy team has like everybody protected for 2 turns and counters to what you have. You're going to use Gizmo, people have Marichka. You're going to have to use your Kavlax, people have everybody in Stone Skin. Or they have Nianhe on the other side and everybody's with block damage in the beginning of the fight. And if you do not pay attention what you're facing, what you have on your mind might not work. Even if you're paying attention, it's a red hard. If you do not pay attention, it's even harder. So
Yep.
do your pick, guide your line of pick. For example, you can do some picks that will conduct your opponent to do a counter pick, and that's a way you can guide what you're picking. For example, if you pick a bomber, your enemy has to defend himself against the bomber, so he's going to have block buff champions, passive block damage champions like Nian, Marichka, revivers, cleansers. He's going to react to that. Otherwise, you're going to win. Otherwise, so you put a champion that does that, and your opponent needs to react to that. If he does not react to that, you have to guarantee that this bomb that you put is going to work. Because if it works and he has no counters, you're going to win. Easy win. So it's like a mix between what you want to do and what you have to prevent or conduct your opponent to do. So that's the magic of Live Arena. It's the name says, it's live. So you need to do your action, observe your enemy action, and react to it. And if you have the possibility or the ability to conduct, to guide your enemy picks, sometimes it's really good, really good. You can everything that he puts, you're going to put a counter, or you're going to put something to make his life harder, and he has to answer to that. And there are many strong champions now that you have to immediately answer, like Hegemon, Kavalax, Nell, Vulcanos, Marichka. These champions are really strong. To you do not to pay attention on them. You're gonna to have to answer to them, and sometimes you have multiple of these champions, and you're gonna have to answer to all of them. It's really hard, but there's ways. There's ways for everything. There's no perfect champion in Raid Shadow Legends. All the champions have counters. All the mechanics have counters. Sometimes it's just harder.
Yeah, I mean, like Marius is pretty hard to counter, but he's counterable. But that's part of why Marius, for me, he's generally my number one pick whenever I can. And I think for a lot of the endgame players, he tends to be a number one, just because having Marius versus not having Marius really does guide what you can and can't do. And the moment the other person has Marius, I have to think, am I banning Marius? Or is there somebody else that I need to ban and I need to just deal with Marius on the other team? And it makes you react. And that's the type of thing you're talking about. And I think that's great. I also think that it's always kind of one of these weird things that, like, Nice, for example, I often try to wait and pick him later because there are some ways that people can counter him early if they think about it. But in some ways, maybe picking him early would force them to counter him, and then I could counter the counters later on. So it really is one of these things that, picking on somebody early is both making sure that you get him, but it also means that you're forcing the other team to try to counter that champion early. And I understand from a strategy, sometimes you want to hold your strategy close to your chest to make sure that they can't actually, figure out what you're doing. But sometimes making your enemy flinch can let you,
Yeah,
outthink them later on too. Definitely a great point
on
about
Live
that.
Arena, it's really important to know your opponent. If you know your opponent, is really good because to know how your opponent's champions are built is really important, and to also know what they have. For example, you're holding your nice pick
Mm-hmm.
to the end because you're afraid that he's easy countered. But if your opponent has a nice, and if he's going to pick your nice before
Yep.
you, if when you have a very superior account and you're facing an inferior account in the perspective of champion number, if you know your opponent, you don't need to pick the best champions you have. You just have to pick the best champions your opponent have because he's going to be out. He's not only going to don't have their picks. you're going to take them, you're going to use them against him.
Yep.
So he's not only prepared. His champions are built to face their counters or he knows how to counter the things that he's used to do. If he's outside of his comfort zone because you pick their champions, he has double trouble because he's going to pick someone else to fulfill that role, and he's not used to play against the strategy that he usually uses, and sometimes he does not have counters for the champions that he counters. You know, sometimes you're not prepared to counter the strategy that you always use because you always use it. So you don't. Okay, I'm going to always pick my Nice. My Nice is my first pick. If you don't pick him and the pick guy picks, okay, what can I do against this champion? I always have him. I'm not used to face him. Sometimes to pick the champion first is interesting if you know who you're facing.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we're probably going to end it on this note too, but as far as team composition is concerned, one of the things I think Raid has actually done a good job with is they provided us with a lot of good champions that are actually freely accessible. Mikage, very viable champion, even in endgame arena, very useful, and she's easily accessible. I guess not easily is the right word, but she's accessible. You can get her eventually. Carnage, very good champion in arena. You can get him eventually. Empress, very good champion. You can get him eventually. Ancora was a fusion. Ostrid was a fusion. Fabian was a fusion. Armands was a fusion. Arbiter, free champion you can get eventually. You know, that's 8 or 9 champions that you could build a team that would be very formidable against a lot of people in arena with. And they're all available for free. Not to mention, you're eventually going to get some good meta champions just because there's the meta champions are not these 5 people and that's it. There's probably, 50 meta champions in arena, maybe 75.
Right now,
probably.
around 50.
Yeah.
Right now,
and
around
even then,
50.
you can certainly make non-meta champions work if you have to around the other meta champions if you can build the teams correctly.
Yeah, it's interesting. Right now, I think is the moment of the game that if you watch the top best 10 performers out in the arena, 40% of them are free champions. So half almost of the top 10 are free champions. So almost everybody's going to have access to them. And that's incredible because 2 years ago, the top 2 performers that had almost no counter was Void champions.
Yep.
Void legendary champions that nobody counters them. You need them to win. So if you don't have them, you're in trouble. And that totally changed. We are having the most diversified meta since the beginning of Raid Shadow Legends right now.
Yeah, and it's, and I'm not going to say it's necessarily freely accessible because even at the top level, the champions might be free, but the accounts are probably not for the most case. There's probably some low spenders up there because, time can certainly help with that as well. But again, you don't have to spend to have fun in arena. Half of it is just the chess match of thinking, and for the most part, you're not going to fight a Doc Moreau account. I mean, I did that once. It was painful, but I don't recommend it. But, most of us are not going to be doing that. But most of us can still have fun in arena trying to outthink your opponent. And I think that's just a great reward. So appreciate having you on. Where can folks catch you? Where can folks find you on...
on YouTube for sure. I'm streaming every day and doing videos for sure. The name of the channel is KruYsen. He's on the hat.
Yep. So yeah, and he's a lot of fun. It's and again, it's we're having fun playing Raid Shadow Legends, and it is a lot of fun talking with other content creators about this stuff. Definitely fun talking with you, and hopefully you guys at home learned something interesting from this as well. It really is. We're talking about meta champions and making the most of your meta champions, but it's a team game, and you can have all the best champions in the world. If you don't put together a team, you're just gonna find yourself getting batted around by the Doc Moreaus or even the Bront CatHerders of the world. So, appreciate you guys. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Let us know if there's anything you think we could have covered a little bit better, or maybe some tricky teams you enjoy using in arena that surprise people as well. It's actually kind of fun to hear some of that stuff. And honestly, sometimes innovations in the meta come from somebody just trying something that this is absolutely crazy and I want to try it. And somebody says, oh God, that's super powerful. I got to do that, So, don't be afraid to experiment occasionally as well. The game's supposed to be fun. Have fun with it. And until the next video, I'm Bront CatHerder, and that's KruYsen.